Age was designed to create third-person point-and-click adventure games but can help you create other types of games as well. If you have a visual novel project, I will explain in this tutorial how to take advantage of the features of AGE to make your game. First, we will detail the steps for creating an AGE project that can be used for any type of adventure game. And in a second step, we will focus on the functionalities useful for visual novels. But before we begin, I want to make an important point to avoid confusion. AGE offers two modes for editing scripts. Expert mode using a classic code editor and visual scripting mode, which is much more intuitive. You can switch from one mode to the other at any time. If you are already used to programming languages, maybe expert mode will be more suitable for you. Having said that, in the tutorials, I will only be using visual scripting mode to make them accessible to everyone. The syntax remains the same, regardless of the mode used, so nothing prevents you from following the tutorial in expert mode on your side. Let's start by creating a new project via the main menu. You must define a file name and the folder in which your project will be located. You can move this folder as you wish through Windows Explorer, since the projects are not stored in a database. Once the new project is generated, you will see a scenario with 3 node boxes. Start and END are system boxes, which cannot be deleted. All your boxes must be between Start and END, which represent respectively the beginning and the end of your story. The first step is to configure your project by opening the project page, then clicking on the button at the bottom of the window. You have a multitude of options to customize the configuration of your project, classified by category. It is also here that you will customize the interface images, the text of the credits by language and the init script executed for each new game or loading a save. What interests us for now is the graphics category. Depending on the resolution of the screen and the game, there are two possible situations: when the screen ratio is lower than that of the game, and vice versa when it is higher. Since we want to start our first visual novel, it is preferable to deactivate scrolling and replace it with the letterbox option in the ratio, screen game, field. Scrolling is practical for point and click to follow the character in his movement. Note the default game resolution, which is 1820x 1024 pixels in order to optimize textures. If you opt for Full HD, i.e. 1920x 1080, AGE will have to generate 4 textures 1024x 1024 instead of just 2. Then expand the menus to reach the text category. We're going to change the font and take Comic, which is more suited to our type of game. To see the preview of the fonts, just open the main menu, Text, then Preview Fonts. The Comic font does not have a lowercase letter. If none of the fonts satisfy you, you can create your own font via the Create Font menu. AGE manages several alphabets. A tutorial will be devoted to the creation of fonts. In the meantime, let's come back to our subject. Still in the same category, adding a little movement to the text by activating the typewriter option, which will display the dialogues letter by letter. Other options will be useful to us a little later, in particular the balloon and choice fields, which will allow us to customize the appearance of the conversations. We will come back to that. Now let's go to the creation of our player by clicking on the corresponding button at the bottom of the window. By default, there is already a player named P_Hero. To create a new one, just click the plus button on the main toolbar and enter a name starting with P without special characters. Only underscore is allowed. We are going to cancel and take the already existing player because in our game a player will suffice. To open an asset, player type, or other, just double-click on the name. A search field allows you to filter assets when the list contains a lot of items. To summarize in a few words, a player allows you to control a character and has its own inventory. If you want to manage multiple inventories, you will need to create as many players as there are inventories. This editor also allows you to add scripts that will be executed only when the player is active. The default values are fine with us for now. As for the player, a default scene was generated when the project was created. Select the scene page and double-click on S_Home. The scene editor is surely the editor where you will spend the majority of your time making your game. You will work in parallel with the scenario editor and the dialogue editor. Age offers pathfinding based on a grid system to facilitate movement and interactions with objects and elements of the scenery. This part is especially useful for creating point and clicks in the third person where the movement of the hero becomes a breeze. Many interactions can be set up without a line of code. But again, this is about making a visual novel and we won't need to go into details in this tutorial. Use the mouse wheel to enlarge the scale of the scene or click on the AutoFit button to enlarge it to the correct size. Start by changing the background image of the scene by clicking on the back button on the toolbar with the right mouse button. The left button will allow you to activate or deactivate the layer in the editor only. Then import an image from a file on your computer. Choose a PNG image of 1820x 1024 pixels, corresponding to the resolution of the game. It is possible to add additional layers, but keep in mind that the resolution of the scene is always based on the size of the back.png image. Of course, the resolution of the scene may be different from the resolution of the game. The display will depend on the ratio fields that we saw earlier in the project properties. In our case, the entire decoration will be displayed on the screen while respecting the aspect ratio of the image thanks to the letterbox option. Therefore, two black bands at the top and bottom, or right and left, could be visible. Without objects, it is difficult to go more in this editor. We are therefore going to change the editor to create a character and then be able to integrate it into our scene. The order is important. Click on the object button at the bottom of the window and this time create a new object by clicking on the plus button on the main toolbar. I remind you that the term object is to be used in the broad sense. It is about the objects of the decoration, the inventory, and even the characters. Let's name the O_man. It is in the object editor that you will build your objects and characters by adding animations. There are 3 system animations: stop, walk, and talk. I think their name is self-explanatory. These animations are automatically loaded and played by AGE. To correctly create an object, the first rule to respect is to keep the same size for all the frames of the object's animations. To add frames to an image, all you have to do is click on the folder button on the toolbar to open the object folder where the frames are located. Place your PNG directly in the subfolders of ANIM. The name of PNG files must respect the following nomenclature: direction, underscore, and the frame number on 2 digits starting with 00. The right direction is the default direction. In our example, we will be satisfied with a single frame for the stop animation, replacing the cat with the character. And once the files have been modified from Windows Explorer, you must import the modifications by clicking on the Update button in the toolbar. This manipulation re-imports all the PNGs of the object. Then you must correctly position the pivot point via the cross, either by double-clicking on the image at the desired location or by entering the coordinates directly in the properties. The pivot point has several uses: to manage the change of direction, the position relative to the ground or a surface, and the display order to control the depth. Again, this subtlety is not essential for our visual novel. Let's finish configuring the character by giving him a name and a text color. Note that an object that does not have a name cannot be selected by the player. A list of predefined colors is available to customize the color of the character's dialogues. Let's choose, for example, blue. The values can be modified in the text menu, then edit palette. The color codes are in RGB format in hexadecimal. Now that we have our character, we can go back to the scene editor. Small tip to know: you can return to the previous page tab either with the shortcut Ctrl+Tab or with the F9 key. To move to the next tab of the bar, press the F11 key, and in the other direction with the F10 key. The item group of the toolbar allows you to add objects, labels, doors, and shots. The respective shortcuts are O, L, D, and S. Remember them, they will come in handy. The letter refers to the word door. We will therefore press O to display the list of objects in our project and choose the famous character. Move it with the mouse like this, or with the arrow keys on the keyboard for more precision, or finally via the properties by entering the values directly. If you need to adjust the scale of the object, first select the object, hold down the Ctrl and Shift keys, and use the mouse wheel down or up. If you prefer to enter the value directly, just press Ctrl and W. You must always add the hero object in a scene to have control of the player. As before, we are going to press the O key and place our hero on the invisible part of the scene. Let's also take the opportunity to give it a name by going back to the object editor. Another handy shortcut is the F4 key, which opens the asset of the selected item. This shortcut also works with code. Let's call it hero and turn on movie mode to display hero lines. At the bottom of the screen is movie subtitles. Then let's use the Control Tab shortcut to get back into the scene. It is not necessarily obvious at first, but by dint of using it, you will not be able to do without it, because we often work on two editors at the same time. Our decor is set. Let's move on to dialogues, the heart of a visual novel and our subject. To create a new dialogue, press Alt and D, and name it D_man. There are two types of boxes: the red boxes for the choices offered to the player, and the blue boxes, which are replicas of the characters. You can add them via the pop-up menu by right-clicking in the view. The goal of this tutorial is not to explain in detail the use of the dialogue editor. There would be a lot to explain, and it would require a tutorial entirely devoted to this topic. I'll show you the basics. Let's start by adding 4 choices to the root of the conversation like this. Then by clicking on a choice, you can add connected boxes and build your replica tree. For the choices, it is not necessary to indicate the name of the character, because it will always be the character controlled by the active player. On the other hand, for the replicas, it must be done by selecting the box and modifying the speaker field. As these are the responses of the character that we have placed in the background, all you have to do is choose their name from the list. To go faster, you can select it in the shortcut field and then double-click on the boxes concerned. Let's continue by adding a new replica for our hero like this. I take this opportunity to point out that it is possible to select either objects or players. When you select a player, it will be the object currently controlled by the player that will be taken into account. In some situations, it can be very practical if you don't necessarily know the current object. It is of course possible to add choices in choices or replicas to make your tree structure more complex. The next step is to initiate the conversation following an event. To do this, let's go back to the scene editor. Events and scripts are located at the bottom of the editor. Click on the New button to display the complete list of events, or right-click on the character and fetch the select event. It's a shortcut. The select event is called when the player selects an object with the left mouse button or finger on a touch screen. I invite you to read the doc for more info on the events. Select the event created to be able to edit the script and click in the code area to add an instruction to our script. The dialog box that appears is specific to visual scripting to guide you. Here, we want to start the conversation. For that we have to find the talk function in the dialog category. Double-click on the function and presto, it appears at the top of the window. The red square indicates that there is an error in the instruction because this function requires a mandatory parameter, the name of the dialog asset. To fill it in, all you have to do is click on the dialog box directly in the instruction and go for D_man. The second parameter is optional and allows you to indicate the identifier of a replica. By default, the conversation starts at the root of your tree. Validate the instruction by clicking on OK and you will see your instruction appear in the script. It is possible to edit the parameters directly from the script without reopening the previous window. The square allows you to move the instruction up or down like this. Before I will just add a comment. That's all. There is nothing else to do. We can test our game now by pressing the F5 key to launch the open scene. We find our conversation and everything works as expected even if the discussion has little interest. At this point we already have an application running and a conversation having written a single instruction. Now it would be nice to customize the graphic style of our game to make it more visual novel. There are several styles of dialogues in AGE. I invite you to take a look at the manual because you have to differentiate the styles specific to the choices and the styles specific to the lines. The manual is accessible from the software's help page, either in preview or in PDF. Let's start with the appearance of the choices offered to the player. By default, the sentences are displayed in line at the bottom of the screen as in a point and click. We will instead opt for a more graphic style using boxes. Open the project page, click the item_choice icon, then the replace button. Choose a PNG image of size 256 x 256 pixels. A free template is available in the resource /image folder of the software. Then in the text group, locate the choice properties. Size is the size in pixels of the base. It may be different from the size of the PNG. You can leave 0 to use the default size. Horizontal space is the space in pixels between two boxes. By default there is no space. Vertical space is the margin in pixels between the bottom of the screen and the boxes. By default, there is also no space. Finally, the most important is the margin in pixels property, which defines the text area inside the box. The values are relative to the PNG image. The order of the margins is left, top, right, bottom, separating the values with a comma. Compared to the PNG I have chosen, I will indicate the following values: 10, 150, 10, 10. The text will be centered horizontally and vertically in this area. This can be verified by testing the game again. Now let's move on to customizing replicas. We have the choice between the point and click style, the default one, the movie style, already used by our hero, the RPG style accompanied by an avatar, and finally the comic style with speech bubble. It's up to you to choose the style that best matches your game. Here we will opt for the comic style. As for the choices, you must add an item_balloon PNG image in the project properties. A free template is available in the resource /image folder of the software. Then you have to modify the margins of the bubble. The margins of the image are used to define the parts that will have to adjust according to the size of the bubble. With this system, you should use solid colors and straight edges. Enter the values 10, 10, 63, 33. For the text, it is exactly the same process that we saw for the choices. Enter the values 10, 10, 11, 36. Let's check again by testing the game. We have our bubble that appears behind the cues and that will adjust to the text and the specified margins. Let's finish with a final improvement by adding a speech animation to the character. To do this, select the character and press F4 to directly access the object's asset. Display its folder via the folder button. Open the Talk subfolder and copy your PNGs into it. Go back to AGE and click the Update button, then Talk and check the animation. We have already seen these manipulations. Remember, the stop, walk and talk animations are handled by AGE, so there is nothing else to do. You just have to retest the game to see our character come to life during his speech. We can further improve our staging by zooming in a bit on the character when the conversation begins. It's very simple, but we will have to add instructions. Click on the Dialog tab and open D_man. At the bottom of the window, you have two script fields. The first is executed when the conversation starts, and the second when it ends. This is exactly where we want to act. Click in the Enter field and select the camera group. It is the zoom function that interests us. Double-click on it and enter the value 150 for the zoom parameter, i.e. a zoom of 150%. Automatically the previous parameter goal appears with a star to indicate that a default value will be used. Here it is simply a question of ignoring this parameter. Validate the instruction, then do the same for exit without changing any parameters. Calling the zoom function without parameters deactivates the zoom mode. We can retest to see the result. The function also allows you to adjust the transition time and the offset in X and Y if you need to crop the camera. Another way to do this is to use shots which require a bit more manipulation. But you have more control over your staging. We can see that quickly. Return to the scene, press S or the shot button on the toolbar. Place your frame correctly to compose your image. Return to the dialog editor. Delete the two instructions by right-clicking on the square. Add a new instruction and enter with the shot function this time. Click on name to choose your shot. We only have one for now. Click on duration and enter the value 2000 to have a 2-second transition. Because by default there are no transitions, so for exit it's slightly different. Add the same function and specify 2000 again, or another duration, to get a return transition. Let's see the result. Even if it takes longer to set up, I recommend this method because the timelines are based on shots and will allow you to create even more professional transitions. Finally, here is the last point I would like to cover in this tutorial. There is a cool effect that you can see in many visual novels. It's the background blur effect. Thanks to the zoom, you can apply a blur on the background, leaving the character and the elements in the foreground in focus. This scene does not lend itself well to it because the armchair is on the same layer as the decoration, but we can always try. It will show you the principle. First, create a new enter event without parameters and add an instruction by taking the aperture function. Light is the amount of light in percentage. Enter 100. Y is the position in pixels that limits the background. We can put 0 since we want to act only on the decor. Blur is the intensity of the blur. Put 1 because the value 1 will not affect the scenery if the zoom is at 100%. And finally, the zoom parameter makes it possible to accentuate the blur exponentially according to the value of the zoom in progress. You can enter the value 4 for this demo. Launch the game one last time and watch, it's magic. When I click on the character, the scenery becomes more and more blurry as I enlarge the image. As I have, it would have been necessary to detach certain elements of the foreground for the rendering to be more realistic. Here, we have done the tour of this tutorial, which showed you how to create your first visual novel game with AGE. Of course, we could go much further to make the game more fun and richer in terms of puzzles and realization. Like, for example, creating an introductory in-game cinematic using timelines. These timelines can also energize the narration by using them at several times as transitions. Or increase the number of items and characters by expanding the conversation choices to give the player more freedom. Thanks for following this tutorial. I invite you to subscribe to the channel, join the AGE community on Discord, and subscribe to the newsletter to follow the news. All the useful information is available on my site.